At its core, Advent is the good news, not that we wait well, but that God comes.
I kind of just don't want to even assume that someone listening understands what you mean by the season of Advent.
It's saying things are put in motion when God comes. Therefore, we want to be attentive.
We are living in a world that has conditioned us to believe that waiting is bad. Like, there is no value.
There is something about waiting that forms something in us. What God does in us as we wait is more important than what we're waiting for.
There's a particular torture in waiting, and I wonder if it's because it's so vulnerable.
We tend to skip over the bits of the Christmas narratives themselves that are not that joyful.
When we're waiting for something, there's lots of stuff that's coming up. Our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, our fears.
If you could summarize the beauty of what Advent points to, what would you say to those who are still unsure whether they even believe that?
This podcast is supported by Stewardship, helping Christians be the best stewards of the resources God gives them.
Radical generosity has always been central to the Christian story, and stewardship can help make it part of everyday life.
For decades, Stewardship has helped Christians give in ways that are simple, flexible, and deeply rooted in faith. They help you give well and see your generosity make a real difference.
A Stewardship Giving Account gives you one place to manage all of your giving, regular and one-off, available 24/7.
You can set aside funds for future giving, respond quickly when urgent needs arise, and see clearly how your generosity is making a difference over time.
Discover more at stewardship.org.uk. Welcome to another episode of Re-Enchanting, the podcast brought to you by Seen and Unseen. I am Belle Tyndall.
And I'm Justin Briley.
And together we talk about this theme of re-enchantment. We scout out hints of it, clues of it, questions of it, us seeking it, and we wonder whether we really are in such a disenchanted world. And we do so with a phenomenal range of guests from all different corners of the cultural landscape, and today is no different.
No, today's guest is Rich Villodas, is the Brooklyn-born lead pastor of New Life Fellowship in New York City. He's the author of several books, including the award-winning Deeply Formed Life. Today, though, he joins us to talk about a new book, Waiting for Jesus. It's an Advent invitation to prayer and renewal as we re-enchant today the art of waiting. Welcome along, Rich.
So good to be with both of you. Thanks for the kind invitation.
Oh, I'm so excited. Rich, if someone was to ask me what I'm reading at the moment, my answer would genuinely be your Advent book. And that's not even for research purposes. It's really not. I really am going through your book with my wonderful friend Louise. So actually, where I'd usually finish a book by the time an interview has come on, I'm not moving ahead until she does. She'd kill me. But before we talk about what I'm reading, tell us what you're reading.
Yeah, I'm in a season right now where there's two books that I've been going through. One is I'm a big proponent of family systems theory. And so as a pastor, as I think through matters of polarization, how do we hold together a very diverse congregation? There's a book that was written in 1996 by a guy named Ronald Richardson called Creating a Healthier Church, which is using family systems theory as a means of trying to move in that direction. So that's one. And then last year I read Marilyn Robinson's book on Genesis, and I just started taking it back out again. I was so moved by her reflections, and so I started going through it again. So those are two books that I'm currently reading at the moment.
Oh, Marilyn Robinson's Genesis I recommend that, I think, like at least once a week to someone. Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
It really is. Her insights are wonderful.
Yes. And it's topping, sorry, I'm going off topic here, but it's topping bestseller lists all over the place. If you'd have told me 5 years ago that some kind of commentary on Genesis would be topping bestseller lists, whether it's written by Marilyn Robinson or not, I would have rolled my eyes, I think.
Same, with you.
Yeah, it's a
Wonderful.
sign of the times.
Time we got Marilyn back on. She was
yeah.
very glad to have her as a guest in one of our first seasons of this show. But yeah, wonderful, wonderful stuff. Tell us a bit about where you're joining us from right now, New York City, Rich, and the church that you've been pastoring there for a number of years.
Yeah, I've been born and raised in New York City, so Brooklyn in particular, and then in Queens. And so this is all I know, New York City through and through. And yeah, I do have the great privilege of pastoring a church called New Life Fellowship, which was started by a gentleman named Pete Scazzaro, who's written a number of books on like emotional health and spirituality. And some 13 years ago, I succeeded Pete. It's a church with about 80 nations represented in a neighborhood where 123 languages are spoken. And so it is absolutely beautiful and at times very confusing. And so the more different kinds of people in one space, the more opportunity for misunderstanding. So that is my weekly experience and occurrence as a pastor here in New York City.
Do you thrive on that kind of the diversity, the melting pot that is New York, and especially the part that you inhabit?
I think I really do. I really appreciate, whether it's in food or whether it's in cultural expression, diverse thought, diverse experiences. And so in some ways, I think I was made for something like this in the city that I was born and raised in. So yes, I see it as a great gift and something that I find great joy in being part of.
I mean, we get a lot of US politics in our newsfeed over here, maybe too much, to be honest. But one of the things that's been crossing my newsfeed is the fact that your city recently elected new mayor, are Muslims whose politics are arguably the polar opposite of Donald Trump. I mean, what's your reflection on that appointment? And I guess, how do you navigate what every pastor in one form or another is having to navigate in the US, this very polarized political moment we're going through?
Well, first, I was reminded in a significant way the place that New York City, the United States, of course, but New York City holds in terms of the significance it has in the world as it relates to social and political happenings. There was a person in the UK who, on the night of Election Day here in New York, that I read someone say, I'm staying up until whatever it was 2:30, 3:30 in the morning, your time, because they wanted to see the results of this race. And I just thought, yeah, this is, New York City occupies a lot of space in places around the world. And so, a few thoughts. One is, I do think the younger generation expressed their hope for a particular future. In some respects, the vote was a repudiation of the policies and an environment of Trumpism. And so in some respects, I think it was that. Beyond that, I think he put his finger on an issue of utmost importance for New Yorkers around affordability. And because of his super focused approach to his candidacy, I think that message resonated with a number of New Yorkers. And as someone who's been born and raised here and who pastors people from all across the socioeconomic spectrum, I saw how his message really resonated. But what was also interesting to me in the process was I was struck by the level of fear and misinformation as it relates to his religion or his policies, whether it's evangelicals calling him a jihadist or a communist. For me, what I've discovered is whether you agree or disagree, a simple Google search can really help to clarify various terms on what someone is or not. And so along those lines, the Sunday after he was elected, I recognize my congregation is incredibly diverse. And so in previous national elections, probably 30% of my church voted for Donald Trump and 30% voted for Kamala Harris or Joe Biden prior to that. So it's very politically diverse. And so I had to go into that space recognizing that there are a lot of people for various reasons who are approaching his leadership with great fear and apprehension. And so I had to offer pastoral words around, you can disagree, but there's one thing about disagreeing. It's another thing about living according to misinformation. You can disagree but not be driven by anxiety and fear. And so but it feels like that is my pastoral task every other month in the United States, trying to pastor people through the kind of social and political craziness that is our context here in the United States of America.
Yeah, but that also feels like when you were talking about your church, then 30% voting one way, around 50% voting another. I was just like, whoa, that's rare. And I don't necessarily mean in the church world, although sadly a bit of that too, but I just mean in the world. Where else are you getting all of those kinds of people in one place with one kind of shared sense of belonging to each other, even across those vast differences? And I'm under no illusions, Rich, that that's a tricky, like diversity is not cheap, right? It's costly, it's expensive, but still, like, what a miracle that's your problem. Do you know what I mean?
No, it does feel like a miracle from time to time, and it's very challenging, which is why I tell fellow pastors who are interested in creating diverse communities of faith that this is not a strategy for fast growth. In fact, this is a strategy for your church not growing at all, because we are attracted to what we're familiar with. And when you find folks who might see the world in many different ways than you do, or what makes for human flourishing comes at a different vision, lots of folks are not attracted to that. And so it's one of the reasons why I mentioned what am I reading and constantly reading our books on family systems, because I'm trying to help our congregation grow in a phrase called differentiation, which essentially means that there can be distinction without disconnection, especially in times of disagreement and distress. And the goal pastorally for me is to create an environment where that can happen in a greater way. It's not easy, but I do think it's important, especially as a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about this phrase, and it's true in many cases, though admittedly not all. This idea that difference is a problem is a belief, it is not a fact. And I think about that a lot. Can I ask you, before we move on to Waiting for Jesus, I'd love to just quickly, while we have you, get a read on like the spiritual landscape in New York, because like you say, you're like the eyes of the world are on you, and in many ways you're like 5 steps ahead of where the rest of the world might go. And so what's the spiritual landscape in your city?
I think what we're discovering in various parts of our city, and one of the great gifts I have is being in good relationship with a number of pastors in New York. New York is a very large place. And so to talk about faith is to talk about multiple expressions of that. However, within the Christian faith, here's what I'm seeing. Here's some of the trends I'm seeing. I'm seeing in a post-pandemic world so many young adults coming to faith in Jesus. Yesterday, I had talking about waiting for Jesus. There was a book signing in the church around that. The book, really grateful for our congregation getting behind this book release. And in the process, I met so many people one-on-one as I was having conversation, and so many of them were 20-something-year-olds that have just started coming to church. And here's what was fascinating about that as well. Many of them brought a friend who was new to faith. And so I think that what I'm seeing in New York, and not just in Queens, where I pastor, but in Manhattan and in places in Brooklyn, there's a resurgence or a surge of young adult energy for matters of Christian faith. And they are invitational as well. So these new Christians are inviting their friends. And so it's just been a hunger, a sense of openness, a curiosity to matters of faith that we're seeing in New York. Lots of folks look at New York from around the country and go, oh, that crazy place, that's where you don't want to go. You're going to lose your faith if you come there. And I'm thinking, no. As someone who's born and raised here, there's lots of wonderful things happening in New York City, and we're seeing lots of hunger, especially from the younger generation.
I mean, just to hold on to that for a moment, because this is an area I'm fascinated by. You may or may not be aware, I wrote a book and host a podcast series called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Rich. And just recently in this country, we've had something called the Quiet Revival, a set of statistics that appear to be showing likewise a kind of upturn among Gen Z, turning back to faith, often the demographic you don't see in church. And yet, and so presumably you're seeing something that feels different to what you have seen previously in your 13 years pastoring at that church. So what's changed, do you think?
2 things, I think. I think number one, at least to New York, my neighborhood in Queens was the global epicenter of the pandemic. And so I think the level of anxiety, despair, isolation, disconnection I think it brought people to a particular emotional and spiritual state that they were not happy with. And so when things began to open up again, so in our case here, 2023 is when things started stabilizing again in New York City. 2024 and 2025 have been now, we are accelerating in some significant ways. And so I think it's been a hunger on one level existentially, where people have come across a level of pain and death and hurt, and realizing there's something beyond my experience, but not just existentially. I think from a sake of just a human connection, there is a longing and a desire for people to be part of something bigger than themselves in close proximity to others. And so from the emotional, spiritual, and relational kind of reasons, I think these are why we're seeing this surge of young adult energy and activity. And what we're seeing is, in our context as well, not just individuals coming to church, but communities being formed of connection. We've had small groups and community life over the years, but we're seeing an acceleration of that. And I think part of that is, in a post-pandemic world, the anxiety, the disconnection, the isolation, the loneliness. People are longing for some deeper meaning as well as for human connection.
Yeah, it's such a familiar story on this side, of the pond as well. So it's just fascinating to hear that NYC is seeing that happen. Anyway, to come to the book itself, actually aspects of your own faith journey are woven in to Waiting for Jesus, this wonderful sort of resource that covers all of the Advent period up to Christmas Day. And we are putting this interview out in time for the beginning of Advent, so really worth getting hold of this. Anyone watching or listening, and you want something in your hands that'll help you to sort of just, put what this season is all about back at the center of it. But tell us about your own faith journey here, because you talk in the book about your grandfather, who sounds like a contemplative himself, Marcos Rios, very influential in your own faith formation. Tell us about him and your own journey to faith.
Well, coming to faith in Jesus, 1999 in August, I did not grow up in the church. My family was not religious. I would go with my grandfather, Marcus, when I was a child, and my grandmother, Carmen, his wife. And I stopped attending around 12 years old with them because I wasn't getting much out of it. At 17 years of age, found myself back in church because I started dating a pastor's daughter. And the pastor's daughter of the pastor said, the only way you can date my daughter is if you come to church. And so I said, I'm there, pastor. I was at every church gathering. I was at the men's ministry, women's ministry, young adults, usher. I was doing it all just to date this girl. And the relationship came to an end when I was 19. And I just found myself just depressed one day, walking to our home in Brooklyn. And I saw that my 4 younger siblings were at this church that I used to attend with my grandfather. I decided to go to the church to receive prayer, and they were having a kind of revival service where lots of people started coming. In our context, that church had about 30 to 40 people. That summer, it grew to maybe about 100 people. And so lots of people were coming to faith in Christ that summer. And that evening, 15 family members, including myself, came to faith in Jesus. And it was a remarkable evening of kind of generational shifting taking place. And it was at that point where I had lots of questions about what it meant to follow Jesus, what it meant to be in relationship with God. And so I went down the street to my grandfather, Marcus, who is really a godly man, a man of the scriptures, a man of prayer. And he was very ill at the time. And I just asked him, can I sit next to you for a moment? Because I have a lot of questions about the decision I've made to follow Christ. And 2 hours later, we were done, and he said, why don't you come back again? And so for the next 8 months before he passed away on April 16th, 2000, I sat at his bedside, shoulder to shoulder, with my Bible open, his Bible open, for about 4 to 5 days a week, 2 to 3 hours each time. And he discipled me and mentored me, answered all my questions. And that I wish everyone received what I did, those that formative year. Lots of spiritual questions, lots of curiosities, lots of confusion about what happened. But having a guide who was non-anxious, who was a well of wisdom, who was a person of prayer and reflection, that got me off to, I think, a beautiful start a number of years ago, and formed in many respects the foundation of what it's looked like for me to be a follower of Jesus over these years.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I agree. That safe space to wrestle and process and ask the same question 8 or 9 times,
Yeah.
and the patience that someone will answer it 8 or 9 times. And yeah, that's a real gift. Your book, you've written an Advent book, and I kind of just don't want to even assume that someone listening understands what you mean by the season of Advent, in that, there are some people I know who would think it's nothing more than an Advent calendar. And it's just the run up to Christmas. I'm thinking, are Advent calendars a British thing? Do you have those?
I did see for the first time a Harry Potter advent calendar.
Is that not a tradition in the US then, Rich? Because we over here, everyone, basically from the 1st of December gets an advent calendar.
In Target, we're starting to see all kinds of calendars. But I think that's a pretty new phenomenon over here in the States.
Okay.
Oh, you learn something new every day.
That's interesting, because normally it's the US sending all their traditions our way. This may be one that's crossed the pond the other way.
That's right.
Oh my goodness, yes. Honestly, you're welcome, America. It's an excuse to have a little piece of chocolate every morning, because why not? Anyway, sorry, I really took us down a silly road there. But back to my point. I think people don't know what the season of Advent is, other than the time when you do all your Christmas shopping. That's not necessarily what you mean, I don't think, when you talk about the season of Advent. So introduce it to us, would you?
Advent is a tradition in the church that in some respects, you could say it started solidifying in the 6th, 7th century. And it is much like in the church calendar. The church calendar focuses on specific areas of faith to either prepare us for what's to come or to have us be rooted in a different kind of mindset. And the Advent calendar is oriented around the arrival of God in Christ. And so Christmas season, we often think about Christmas, at least in the States, here in the United States, Christmas begins after Thanksgiving or sometimes after Halloween, depending on who you talk to over here.
Yeah.
But it is the season in which we're saying God is coming, or God has come, and we want to prepare our hearts for that arrival in waiting. And so historically, Advent has been structured according to 4 different movements. This is where we light our Advent candles, something we've done as a congregation for a few decades here. The themes of hope and peace and joy and love as a means of waiting for the appearance of God in Christ. And so what Advent is it's saying things are put in motion when God comes. Therefore, we want to be attentive to the coming of God in Christ. And that's what essentially the Advent season is about.
I love that. There's I think about this all the time. The former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, he talked recently about how we are creatures of yearning and longing and missing God and waiting for him, and never is that more tangible than in Advent. I think it's and your book called Waiting for Jesus touches on that, this idea of waiting in all of its forms. And the thing is we are living in a world that has conditioned us to believe that waiting is bad. Like there is no value in the practice of waiting. I'm guessing you don't agree with that. And then, and so tell us what we're missing when we think that waiting is nothing but an inconvenience.
As a parent, here's what I'm discovering. I have a 16-year-old and an 11-year-old who they want it now. What it is, it doesn't matter. It is now. Whether it's a piece of chocolate, whether it's a dinner, whether it's a particular toy or a game. And I used to think that a good parent, in some ways, I swung the pendulum a little bit to say, you know what, I may just give my child what they want right now. I want to just pour out generosity right now. I want to let them know you don't have to wait. And at the same time, I think what I've discovered is there is something really beautiful about waiting. Now, on one level, it's very painful because we can be creatures that are marked by a sense of immediacy. I want something and I want it right now. But I think there is something about waiting that forms something in us, which is why one of the lines I write in the book is that what God does in us as we wait is more important than what we're waiting for. We're often waiting for many things. And I think in the process, as we're waiting, there is a sense of character formation, a sense of dependence, a sense of waiting and longing that is important for our own formation. And so, in a world that is marked by immediacy, a world that's marked by instant gratification, I think we all know whenever we have to wait or when something takes longer to actually get done than we anticipate, there's something potentially beautiful that's being formed in us. And I think that's the hope of a resource like this. And with Advent, what God does in us as we wait is more important than what we're waiting for.
There's a lovely line you quote from Eugene Peterson. Waiting in prayer is a disciplined refusal to act before God acts. Do you want to just open up that quote from Eugene Peterson?
I love Peterson's line because, our activity in the world is often marked by great anxiety. That if we don't take the lead on something, we're going to miss the moment or something is not going to happen. And so this disciplined refusal to act before God acts is not an invitation to passivity. It's not an invitation to not being thoughtful about our ways, but it is, I think, a recognition of our own anxiety and our reactivity that often prompts us or forces us to say, I have to do something right now. Advent says God is engaged in the world. God is active in the world. And it is an opportunity to discern the presence of God in a given moment. That's what Advent is about. God. Christ comes, Christ came, Christ comes, Christ will come again. And how do we discern the coming of Christ? How do we discern his presence right here and right now? I think that's what Peterson is getting at. Instead of being marked by anxiety and reactivity, we can be marked by a sense of presence and reflection and prayerfulness, knowing that there is a God who is involved in the world right now and invites us to join him in whatever he's doing. I think that's a better way to live than to live a life marked by anxiety and reactivity. So that's, for me, the gem and the wisdom of that statement by Peterson.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. You also have, and like I say, I'm moving through this book in real time. In fact, in slower time, because my friend and I are taking 2 weeks to do every 1 week. So I'm spending 2 days in each of your pages. So I'm really soaking it in. And so you write this page in the first section, so the first week of Advent, about emotional honesty in waiting. And I think that's so important because there's a particular torture in waiting. And I wonder if it's because it's so vulnerable, particularly when you feel like you're waiting on God, like you're waiting for him to come through for you, you're waiting for breakthrough because you've asked and now you're a bit like a sitting duck, like you're just open to hopelessness, right? Like because you're not seeing it come through. And so can you just talk a little bit about that? How also waiting doesn't have to be like this, like serene, nothing's touching me, like removed from reality kind of practice.
Yeah. Well, whoever's experiencing that, I really need that person to pray for me because I think the average human being, when we're waiting for something, there's lots of stuff that's coming up. Our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, our fears. We have a capacity for imagining the worst possible outcomes. I remember there was a moment where a number of years ago, I had lymphatic tuberculosis. But before that was diagnosed, I had a number of months where all kinds of tests were being done and biopsies were being done. And every time there was another test and I had to wait 3-4 days, a week to get any kind of results, my mind painted the worst possible conclusion of what this was going to be. And I think that's normal for human beings to be caught up in that level of anxiety. And so waiting in community, waiting with emotional honesty before God and before others, I think has a really a wonderful stabilizing effect on our lives. Whenever I find myself in the middle of waiting for something, whether it be for something to change, whether it be for an answer for a query that I have, there is something really wonderful. And this is why I meet with 3 pastor friends for 90 minutes once a month, been doing this for 8 years. And to have a space where I can talk about my reactivity, my anxiety, my concerns, my fears on a regular basis, and doing it as well with my wife, Rosie, or some trusted friends, I realized this is what's going to aid me in the waiting. I often need spaces for emotional processing and vulnerability, not being left to my own devices. And so, yes, if we don't have that, now we're going to tailspin and spiral out emotionally, because that stuff was not meant to be carried in our own hearts alone. It's to be offered to God and to offer to others. But that emotional honesty, I think, is really important.
This episode is brought to you by Stewardship, a Christian charity making generosity simple and intentional.
With a Stewardship Giving Account, you can support over 12,000 churches, charities and ministries, all from one place.
Discover more at stewardship.org.uk.
You are quite honest and candid, actually, in the book about your own sort of issues around anxiety attacks, especially sort of in your 20s. This comes sort of in the segment that you move on to on peacemaking specifically. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where that came from for you? And I guess it's a word we've all become so familiar with, anxiety, the anxious generation and so on. Why does it feel like this has just become the presenting issue, especially among young people in today's generation?
When I think about my own journey, for me, anxiety, this excessive worry or concern, it emerged out of relational loneliness. It emerged out of a sense of meaninglessness. What is the purpose of my life? And I think, at least in this generation, I have a 16-year-old, I have an 11-year-old. So I see this up close as a parent, as a pastor of a local congregation with a number of teenagers and young adults. I think there is, say it generationally, whether you want to talk about the advances in technology that have actually created more possibility for comparison. I think things like social media. Our lives are always in some form of discontentment because of what we're seeing and what we're comparing ourselves to, and who has more followers and who's getting more traction and who's going viral. I think we're at a point in our society, beyond just the existential kind of challenges that people feel on a regular basis. We have now this technological source of anxiety where our lives are always on some point of display and comparison. And so my anxiety a number of years ago was not rooted in that level of comparison. It was more, here's an existential crisis I'm experiencing in terms of meaning, in terms of what's my purpose, in terms of my loneliness. But I think all of that has gotten exacerbated. The existential crisis will always hit us from one generation to the next because that's what it means to be human. But now there are forces that compound, I think, that level of pressure and stress in our society. And I think that's some of what we're experiencing in this modern generation, especially around social media.
So where do you go with the antidote, or I suppose the opposite to that is peace? Anxiety, we need to find the peace. What's your advice, laid out in this book about peace, making things that make for peace rather than just kind of peacekeeping? You do kind of, say there's a difference between peacemaking and peacekeeping. I
do think as a follower of Jesus, as a pastor, as a Christian, I believe that there is an experience of peacefulness that's made available in Christ. I think this is the Advent season, that the peace that we all long for internally and socially can become a possibility as we are attentive to the way of Christ and to the presence of Christ. But that peace that comes our way is not to be privatized. That peace that comes our way is not our own kind of personal experience. It is to now be brought out into the world, to be marked so that the world could be marked by greater shalom and peace and wholeness. And so the categories of like peacekeeping and peacemaking for me are important because I'm trying to frame peace in a way that moves beyond just emotional stasis or psychological well-being. I think that's part of the journey. Peacekeeping for me is a way of life that seeks to avoid any notion of conflict, disruption, or difficulty for the protection of my own sense of peace and well-being. And I think ultimately what begins to happen is when our lives are marked by the avoidance of any form of conflict, we now live according to a false peace. Any relationship knows this. Our inability to be honest and speak truthfully about reality does not move us closer to one another. It moves us into a more of a pseudo kind of peace, a false kind of peace. Peacemaking, on the other hand, is a willingness to have the difficult conversations, to risk the challenging conflicts in service of love, in service of joy, in service of peace. And I think the Advent season is an opportunity not simply for a kind of privatized and sensationalized kind of peace, but what does peacemaking require of us? It does require of us truthfulness and justice and honesty and a greater capacity to negotiate our differences in ways that are not marked by violence, whether that violence comes verbally or whether that violence comes physically. And so I think Advent is a opportunity to rediscover what peacekeeping, or peacemaking rather, should look like in our generation, in our families, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our world.
Yeah, absolutely. And you pull on lots of biblical stories through it, but thinking about what we would call the nativity, thinking about that story of the incarnation of Jesus coming into the world, like, I think that's what's so fascinating about it. And I wonder if that's what so captivates our imagination, is it works on so many levels, in that it brings this like inner peace. I think about the words of O Holy Night a lot, because I mean, who doesn't? Like, it's a favorite, but I think it grabs it because the whole first verse is about the soul feeling its worth. Right. Yeah. And it's like, okay, this is what the incarnation means to me. And then like the second verse, or is it the third? I can't remember. It moves on to the chain shall he break, for the slave is our brother, in his name all oppression shall cease. So the whole nativity, the whole act of the incarnation, right? The whole thing that Advent is like driving us towards has this multi-layered, this will change you, and through you will change the world around you.
But I think you're naming something here, the multi-layeredness of Advent, but more broadly on the gospel, that if the gospel does not have something to say to the individual, to our interpersonal relationships and our institutional realities, we are missing the fullness of what the gospel is. That the gospel is not simply a message that when you die, you go to heaven, as glorious as that good news is. The gospel is far more than just some kind of theological atonement theory. The gospel at its core is fundamentally about Jesus Christ and what his good news is for the entirety of the world, which is why I think our definition of the gospel always determines the nature and the scope of our mission. If the gospel, like peace, is individualized and privatized, then there's no urgency to work for a world in which the slave is my brother. But when the gospel is good news for not just our individual lives, but for every facet of human existence, now we're invited to participate in something greater than ourselves. And I think that's what Advent invites us into. Advent is not about your own sense of peace, but about the peace that the world is desperately longing for. And I think that's all connected to how we understand the vastness of the gospel.
Good stuff. Good stuff. There's so much more as well in the book. We've talked about waiting. We've talked about peacemaking. There's rejoicing as well. Now, joy is, again, as you said, one of those key principles that, we mark when we light the Advent candle and so on. I'm so pleased to hear, by the way, Rich, that your church does the lighting of the Advent candles, because that's something that's kind of, been around in UK churches. I wasn't sure whether it was a thing that you do in the US, maybe more in liturgically driven sort of,
Yes.
traditions in the USA. But what's significant for you about that moment, of marking each of those weeks of Advent with the lighting of the candle?
We've been doing it as a congregation for probably over 20 years. And I think every week when we do it, we are patiently as a congregation trying to fix our attention on some aspect of this good news. And so whether we're talking about joy or peace or hope, in our context, we're a church that incorporates various aspects of liturgy and shared prayers and responsive prayers and things along those lines. And so that's it's been part of our church for a few decades now. But I find something to be so beautiful and captivating when, as a community, we are fixing our attention in a way that's not just perfunctory. It's not just we're going to move from, this is just this part of the service. Let's now move on to the preached word or move on to the next song. But it's a contemplative moment for us. It's not simply let's light the candle and let's move on. It's let us fix our attention on what our souls and what our world is longing for as we light the candle of peace or as we light the candle of joy. And so for us, lighting the candles in conjunction with various prayers and moments of silence and reflection, I think is very formative. Our worship gatherings are very formative to one degree or another. And I think it's our invitation to be deeply rooted and formed in these particular themes of Advent.
I love that. It's become, we've always done it in the church that my wife's the minister of, but it's something I always love because it does give you that sense of progression, that sense that we're gradually unfolding something as we approach that final middle candle. You've got the four ones around the side,
Yes.
the sides that are the 4 weeks, but on Christmas Day, or at your midnight mass service or whatever, you get to light finally. And there's a sense in which it really does kind of, give you that runway towards the big thing that this is all about. Let's talk about joy, though, rejoicing in particular. And again, you make a distinction between joy versus happiness. What's the difference to you between those two?
I think my simplest way of explaining that is I think happiness is circumstantial, whereas joy is really about connected to our relationship to God. Happiness happens when I get a raise. Happiness happens when I find a parking spot in New York City. Happiness happens when there's something situational or circumstantial. The joy, however, I think it moves beyond circumstance. I think about what Jesus in John 15, as he is offering parting words to his disciples, he says, "My joy I give to you." Now, what's fascinating about that statement is he is about to go to the cross. He is offering his final words before he gets crucified for the sins of the world. And yet, in the moment of great coming pain and a sense of hopelessness and despair, he says, "I have joy, my joy that I want to give you," which is far deeper than circumstance or happenings. And so joy is really connected to our connection and communion with the living God, who pours out a sense of stability and joy beyond just smiles, which is to say, I think joy is not so much about laughter, but a sense of the soul being at ease in the presence of God, no matter what's happening at a given moment. And so, and the other thing I would just say about joy is it is important that joy be connected to the entirety of the rest of our human existence. We cannot cut out some aspect of our lives without compromising the rest. And so it's one of the reasons why we have in our congregation a Blue Christmas service that we've offered every year for a number of years now, where not everyone is singing joy to the world during this holiday season. There's lots of loss, there's lots of pain. And so to create a space where we say, how can we bring our laments and our griefs and our disappointment and our sense of loss and our pain and our family members that are carrying sickness in this particular season and bring that to God in this season? Some folks go, isn't that going to create just a dour kind of environment during the season that we should be happy? And I think what actually happens is when we allow ourselves to feel some of those difficult emotions around sadness and grief, what it does is it allows us to feel joy on a deeper level. Because to compartmentalize our souls is to compromise our sense of well-being. And I think joy and grief, joy and lament are to be held together. And I think that's what we're trying to do as a congregation, at least, in this particular holiday season.
Oh, that's so interesting. Someone who's been a real teacher to me over the past 2 years in sort of the art of joy is actually the musician Nick Cave. Because he lost two sons, tragically lost two sons. And he released this book and then this album recently all about sort of God. It's called Wild God. There's a song on it called Joy. And it's the saddest song on the whole album.
Wow.
Like painfully.
Wow.
Like I think the first line in it is I woke up and I feel like someone in my family is dead. That's the line that opens that song, and he's called it Joy. And he's spoken since about how he could have called the whole album Joy. And it is a joyful album. It's full of big sounds but it's exactly that, you know, it's this idea that joy doesn't need you to kind of like exit the circumstances of your life to go and find it in some faraway place, right? It can meet you right where you're at.
And one of the reasons I love the Psalms is because we see in the Psalms the holding together of various facets of human existence. That from one level, the psalmist is saying, Lord, where are you? Or the psalmist is complaining about his enemies or whoever. And the next thing you know, there's a point of like rejoicing or celebration. It's like, how did this happen? And I think what the Psalms demonstrate for us is it is possible, and not just possible, but necessary to hold together all the facets of what it means to be human in service of becoming people that are marked by joy.
And I'm always, as well, we tend to skip over the bits of the Christmas narratives themselves that are not that joyful, you know, the killing of the innocents, you know, by Herod and so on. And, you know, and it quotes, you know, the Old Testament there about the weeping of those who've lost their children. There's grief at the center of the Christmas story, interestingly. And so, you know, it's sort of that's the point, isn't it? It's the light comes into a very dark space and the story is woven into the sorrow, and yet there is joy there. There's joy in the midst of this great sorrow. Shall we continue to talk about one more theme in the book, beholding? I'm going to quote again another theologian you quote there, Maggie Ross, who said that the word behold might be the most important word in Scripture. Now, I'd never thought of it that way, but it does get quoted a lot, the word behold. What do you think Maggie Ross is onto there?
I love her writing. She wrote a book called Silence, a User's Guide, and then another book called Writing on the Icon of the Heart, in which she made that book a bit more accessible. Interestingly enough, her book Silence, a User's Guide was not really so user-friendly. It was very technical, actually. So she needed, I think, a second book to help to extrapolate some of those things there. And so she makes this wonderful claim that behold, he comes in the clouds. Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Her claim is that word, behold, is the most important word because it invites us to fix our attention on what God is doing in a particular moment. And as someone who can be very distracted, as someone who can be in all kinds of different places at a given moment, to do the simple act of beholding, attentiveness to the particular moment, I think is the invitation. And to bring this kind of full circle, my grandfather, when he discipled me, one of the tasks he gave me in those first 8 months of my Christian journey was to do two things. It was to live in the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount and the scriptures, but also to commit entire Psalms to memory. And the first Psalm he had me commit to memory was Psalm 27. So I'm very fond of Psalm 27, specifically verse 4, in which it says, "One thing have I desired of the Lord, and that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple." And this is beholding and beauty. I think this is what the Advent season is all about. There's a phrase that you're familiar with that says, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And when people hear that, it's often through the lens of subjectivism. They hear that depending on who you talk to, a person regards something beautiful and a person might not regard it as beautiful. But I think that phrase, if you think about it a little bit more, I think it's not just a phrase that connotes a sense of subjectivism, but it's the language of contemplation. That beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The person who beholds long enough will begin to see traces of beauty. And so it's not so much about subjectivism, but contemplation. And I think the Advent season invites us to see, to wait long enough in beholding to begin to see traces of beauty in places we might not have seen before. And I think that's the invitation before us.
Oh, that's really beautiful. Really beautiful. Because in your waiting section, you say this thing where you're like, impatience is thinking that life is happening elsewhere, and so you're in a rush to get to the place where things are happening. And it's that, isn't it? It's that, there's this poet, and sort of in many ways he's a psalmist and a pastor and a musician that we've had on the show before, Joshua Luke Smith, here in the UK, and he just has this one line that he says over and over and over again. He will just say, "This is the main event." He'll put a photo on Instagram of all of his sink filled with dirty washing, and he'll just put the caption over it, "This is the main event." Or him reading a book to his children, "This is the main event." And I think what you're pointing on, I think you're hitting on that, aren't you? This idea of to look at something long enough and give it the dignity of being the main event, the place where God might well be doing something beautiful.
Yeah, I know exactly what that's like. I mean, I think people write often out of their own sense of struggle or sense of need.
Yeah.
And I'm no different. I know what it's like to have my mind in so many different spaces, which is why that particular psalm and that particular main event idea is something I've come back to over and over again. What does attentiveness and presence look like today at this given moment?
Yeah.
And I think that's the gift of Advent. Advent says something's happening right now. Can you pay attention to it? Because our scattered brains and scattered minds will usually take us in many different places without any sense of rootedness. And I long for a sense of rootedness.
It's all linked in as well to, that bigger theme with the waiting that is the kind of the overall theme of this Advent devotional, which is about sort of being willing to slow down and find silence in our lives again. I think that's kind of missing from most of our lives at this point. And Advent, even if you do sort of try to kind of recognize it as an important part of the calendar and so on, it can still just fly by in a haze of distraction and noise and preparation and everything else. And now that we sort of have to accompany us at every moment of our life, these smartphones that kind of just constantly ping us and distract us and everything, it's to slow down and to behold something means you do have to kind of put, you have to find space to contemplate. But it's so difficult, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure John Mark Comer well. He's written some very profitable stuff. About the what was that famous book he wrote? The
Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. That's the one. And I read that, and I was so challenged. I was challenged again by the things you had to say in your book as well, Rich, because it's so difficult, isn't it, nowadays, to actually slow down in order to do that contemplative thing, that find the space to behold what is really true and good and beautiful.
Well, as a New Yorker, I am fully aware we live in the city that never sleeps.
You've got speed in your veins.
Indeed. And so, on some level, my mind goes in so many different places. It goes one to this Japanese theologian named Kozuki Koyama, who wrote a book called The 3 Mile an Hour God, in which he said that the average pace that a human being walks is 3 miles an hour. And that is the pace that God walks. And so, N.T. Wright riffed on that a little bit and said, in order to catch up to God, we have to slow down our lives. Nice paradoxical thought there. And I think that's the invitation for all of us. And so for me, when I think about the Advent season, it's an opportunity to pay attention to two things: our outer pace and our inner space. That we do have to adjust our pace of life. We can't do everything. We have to embrace our limits. We do need to create margin in our lives because life can get unrelenting in terms of its pace. But it's not just the externals. It's what's going on inside of me that I need to pay attention to and slow down. What are the questions that I need to be engaging in? What are the values that have so driven my life that I need to once again begin to discern and examine? Are these the values that should be directing my life in this season? So I think Advent gives us a great gift in that it prompts us to slow down our lives, because the greater news is that God is coming, that the world is being made new. And so the invitation is, how can I pay attention to that particular glorious moment that has been marked in history, rooted in faith, and serves as really the foundation of what we hold to believe as followers of Jesus in this particular moment.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I have one final question for you, Rich. Reluctantly, one final question. And it's for anyone listening who is, maybe they wouldn't even know if they call themselves a Christian right now, or maybe if they do, it's new, it's their first advent of really actually being like engaging and stuff. I just would love to kind of like point your wisdom in their direction a little bit, in that we're looking forward to, you know, we're looking with our eyes beholding Jesus who is about to come. And what is, if you could summarize the beauty of what Advent points to, which is this arrival of Jesus, the incarnation, what would you say to those who are still unsure whether they even believe that? What's the invitation it gives them?
Everything that we've talked about to this point can emphasize our waiting, emphasize our rhythms, emphasize our devotion, our attentiveness. And I think all of these things are important and need to be part of the conversation. But I think at its core, Advent is not the good news that we are attentive, is not the good news that we wait well, is not the good news that our rhythms are intact. It's the good news, not that we wait well, but that God comes. It's the good news that God is the one who's attentive to us, even when we don't find ourselves attentive. It's the good news that when we fail to behold, God continues to behold us with eyes of love and chooses to demonstrate that love in the coming of Christ. And so for those who are trying to step into this season, we can step into it in one or two ways. We can step into it placing all the emphasis on how well we wait and how well we behold. I think we're invited to do that. But the greater news for us is that there is a God who comes, a God who beholds, a God who waits with us, a God who pours out joy and peace. And I ultimately think that's the best news in the world. Not that it's up to us, but it's the focus shifts appropriately to the God who comes, not to the people who wait.
That's a great place to leave things as we enter this Advent season coming up in the run-up to Christmas Day itself. Thank you for giving us so much helpful food for thought and a way of actually posturing ourselves to receive that great gift that is Christmas, Rich. And if people want to get hold of the book, as I say, link to it from today's show, but you're looking for Waiting for Jesus. It's an Advent invitation to prayer and renewal by Rich Villodas. And it's been really wonderful to have you here on Re-Enchanting, Rich. Thank you.
Oh, a gift to be here. Thank you for the kind invitation.
Yes. Join me. I'll be doing Waiting for Jesus. Come and do it with me. We'll do it together. We'll wait together. But yes, thank you to you, our listeners. We wouldn't do this without you. So thank you for being here. And thank you for making this conversation with Rich happen. If you want to make further conversations happen, further re-enchanting conversations, you know where to go. seenandunseen.com/give. You can find all the details you need there. And we will see you next time.